السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين. وبعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as has been mentioned in previous khutbahs, has given us as an ummah a responsibility. And when we look to what is happening in the world today, we have a role to play and a part to play, and it is a message that will continue to be pushed until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us the ability to do something. And it is a message that will continue to be pushed until each and every one of us feels and bears the responsibility of what is taking place in our ummah today and the world today. And we have one of two choices. We have the choice of standing up and taking responsibility for what we find in front of us and around us, and facing the consequences of that in this life, whether it is mental stress, emotional difficulty, physical harm, a lack of provision, a lack of pleasure, and so on and so forth. Or we can turn our faces and we can continue to indulge and be self-centered and focused on what we want and what we like and what we desire in this life. But we will stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we leave this life, and we will face the difficulties then. It's one of two choices. You face the difficulty now, or you face the difficulty tomorrow. The one who slacks today will have to pick up that slack tomorrow. There is no escaping. And we often, when talking about the situation of our time, talk about the rulers and talk about those of power and those who have what we see and perceive to be abilities and so on and so forth. And many of us are often critical of them. And some perhaps will go so far as to declare them outside of the fold of Islam, etc., etc. But that does not change our situation. nor does it take us out of what we find ourselves in today. And for many, unfortunately, that engage in such conversations, whether in the masjid, whether in coffee shops, whether online, if you look to the many states that they are responsible for, i.e. their homes, they themselves are not taking care of their responsibilities. And so they point fingers at those above, whilst they themselves are not taking care for those that are below them. And so this is a form of hypocrisy, whether it is the men or the women. And for that reason, the following 2 khutbahs, bi'idhnillah, i.e. this Friday, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us life, the following Friday will be focused on the man in the home and the woman in the home. And we put the men first. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ, that men have been given the responsibility and the position of leadership over women. And this is a responsibility that men have to accept, and likewise women have to accept. The woman in the home has to accept that her man is the head of the household. She is not the head of the household. But if you would like your wife to accept you as the head of the household, then you need to stand up and be a man. Otherwise, don't complain when your wife tries to take the reins. This is a responsibility given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a responsibility, i.e. the responsibility of qawwama, of leading the household. It is a responsibility, if shunned, if left untouched, if not taken care of, it leads to a broken society. That's the end result, a broken society. And so this Friday will be focused on the men. But so that the men don't come to me after the khutbah, next Friday will be on the women. So be patient, because they will get their turn too. And we have to face this issue. We have to talk about this issue. Because if we don't, if our generation do not fix what is taking place in our community, broken homes, broken marriages, then our children are going to be in broken homes and broken marriages. And their children will be in broken homes and in broken marriages. There comes a time where a generation have to bear the brunt of the mistakes made previously, so that the mistakes are not made for those who come after them. And the first point to focus on for the men is that, number one, it is your responsibility to provide for your wife and for your children. The man has the responsibility of an-nafaqah, provision for his wife and his children to the best of his ability. That is the man's job, the man's role. And it is not befitting of a man to expect his wife to contribute when he has the ability to take care of all needs himself. When a man is in a position wherein he needs help, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is vast. It's not to suggest that a man cannot take help from his wife when he needs help, but the man should feel pain when he's in that situation. The man should hurt when he's having to take aid from his wife. And the man should work hard to be able to put food on the table. If the woman is ungrateful for the food he's providing, that's something else. We're not talking about that. That's something that will come next week. But firstly and foremostly, the man needs to earn and put the bread on the table and the plate. That's not the role of the woman. And so no Muslim man should go into a marriage expecting it to be a 50-50. That's not from our deen. That's not the way of the Prophet ﷺ. That was not the way of the Sahaba. And if I am not putting food on my wife and my children's plates, why am I busying myself talking about the responsibility of the hukam in looking after the rest of the people? I'm not looking after my sultana, my dawla, my state in my household. It's something that has to be recognized and rectified. And perhaps some of us are in a position where we can't provide. That's something else. I'm talking about those that have the ability to, but they don't want to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, لِيُنْفِقْ ذُو سَعَةٍ مِّن سَعَةِ. The one who has been given wealth should provide from that which he has been given of wealth. وَمَنْ قُدِرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقُهُ فَلْيُنْفِقْ مِمَّا آتَاهُ اللَّهُ. And the one who has not been given that much of provision, give from that which Allah has given him. Whether you are rich, you provide. Poor, provide. And you put those who you are responsible for before yourself. If you're not putting food on the table, you shouldn't be traveling around the world going on holidays. You shouldn't be performing umrah. You shouldn't be going to visit Islamic lands whilst you've got wives here and children here and you're not providing for them. The person who's performing umrah whilst he has a wife at home who's not providing for, he's doing a sunnah and leaving a wajib. Misunderstanding of the deen. Misapplication of Islam. I might want new clothes, but who comes first? My wife and my children. I might want to eat out with the brothers, but who comes first? My wife and my children. I might want to enjoy myself financially, but what comes first? The bills that have to be paid. That's the man's responsibility. And that's what being a man is. A part of being a man is bearing the burden of responsibility. Being a boy is spending without care or concern for those who you are responsible for. And so you may have a full beard, but you're not a man unless you're taking care of your responsibilities. You may have big muscles, but you are not a man unless you are taking care of your responsibilities. That's what a man is. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ was. That's what the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum were. And the Tabi'een and the awliya, the righteous, etc., etc. And of course, we can understand from this that if I cannot provide for one, then I should not be taking two or three. If I cannot provide for one, then I should not be taking two or three. And if the reason that I'm saying I need a second wife, even though I can't take care of a first wife, is because of the fitna, lower your gaze. Lower your gaze. And if you cannot lower your gaze, fast Mondays and Thursdays. Be a man. Being a man is about refining the self, taking control of the nafs and the desires, not allowing your desires to take control of you. That's being a man. Being a boy, I see, I want, I do. I feel hungry, I eat. I feel thirsty, I drink. I don't take control of myself, myself takes control of me. That's being a boy. And so if I cannot provide for one wife, I should not be taking another wife. And to add to that, the idea that a person can take a second wife secretly, that's not from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, nor is it from the framework of Islam. Why? It contradicts the concept of walima. To have a walima is to spread the news that you have been married, that you have gotten married. And a man who is happy to take a second wife secretly, especially not going to the father, as some brothers will try to do, not going to the father. Ask yourself, if someone did this with your daughter, what would your reaction be? If someone tried to marry your daughter as a secret wife, what would your reaction be? You wouldn't accept it. You wouldn't accept it. Because a man who has ghira, a man who has honor and wants to protect his family, will not allow for his daughter to be married in such a way. So why would you want to marry another man's daughter in such a way? And it's not from the respect of a mu'minah to engage in such practices. So when we look at what's happening in Palestine, think about these little issues because they contribute. When we look at the state of the ummah, look at these issues because they contribute. If I'm going to speak about the rulers of Muslim lands and how they're spending their money on paintings and football teams and so on and so forth, look at myself. They're spending their millions. How am I spending my pennies and pounds? If I'm spending my pennies and pounds on myself, when I have the opportunity to spend it on my family, who's to say that when I have millions, I won't spend it on myself rather than spend it on those that I rule over? What's the difference? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَلَهُنَّ عَلَيْكُمْ رِزْقُهُنَّ وَكِسْوَتُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. When speaking about the wives, that they have the right upon you of provision, food and clothing. Food and clothing. If a sister agrees to overlook provision, and the brother is sincere in wanting to marry her, but wanting to slowly work his way up to provide for her, alhamdulillah. But if a brother goes into a marriage wherein he is happy to remain in that marriage for the duration of the time that they are married without providing a penny because she overlooked the issue of provision, that is a misunderstanding of being a man. Once again, that's a misapplication of being a man. It's a misunderstanding. It's a khalal. It's an issue. Needs to be rectified. The Prophet ﷺ would never accept such a thing. The Sahaba, they wouldn't accept such practices if they had the ability to provide. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men have been given the responsibility. It's not authority to command and point and speak to in an ill manner. No, it's responsibility. I, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, will be held accountable for my wife. My wife will not be held accountable for me. Amana. The Prophet ﷺ was just with his wives. What about the Sahaba? Jabir ibn Zayd, he said, كانت لي امرأتان وكنت أعدل بينهما حتى في القبلة. One of the awliya of the past, he mentioned, I had two wives. I used to be just between them even in kissing. Even in kissing. Something we take for granted. Mujahid, he said, speaking about the Sahaba, كانوا يستحبون أن يعدلوا بين النساء حتى في الطيب يتطيب لهذه كما يتطيب لهذه. He said the Sahaba would be just between their spouses, their wives, to the degree that if he puts perfume on for one, he will put perfume on for the other. And Muhammad ibn Sirin يقول في من له امرأتان يكره أن يتوضأ في بيت إحداهما دون الأخرى. Muhammad ibn Sirin, the great scholar of the past from the Tabi'een, he said that it is disliked for a man to perform wudu in the house of one of his wives without performing wudu in the house of the other. To that degree. And then today we're going to say it's okay to have two wives. I'm in one country for 8 months. I see this one for a month and I go back. The second responsibility after provision that needs to be taken into consideration is the issue of intimacy. To be intimate with the wife. That's her right. That's her right. As for intimacy on behalf of the wives and the lack of intimacy on that side, that's going to be spoken about next week. But for men, a man has to be intimate with his wife just as the wife has to be intimate with her spouse. This is her haqq. Some of the ulama speaking about this issue, Ibn Hajar mentions, for example, in his Sharh al-Bukhari, in Fath al-Bari, that the least amount of time a man can spend away from his wife due to the issue of intimacy is, or the most amount of time, 4 months. 4 months. Even if he is engaged in jihad or ribat, he needs to go back to his wife every 4 months. And the leader of the army should allow him the time to go back to his wife at least every 4 months. Why? So that he can spend intimate time with his wife. Intimacy is her right just as it's our right as men. But yet, again, brothers that are disappearing for months, sometimes years, they don't see their wives. She has a right. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, we will be questioned. We will be questioned. If I do not want to give the rights to those that deserve the rights from me, I shouldn't get married. Why? Because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, I may fall into Jahannam due to lack of provision of those rights. The Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? كَفَى لِلْمَرْءِ إِثْمًا أَن يُضَيِّعَ مَن يَقُودُ أَوْ مَن يَعُولُ. It's enough of a sin that a man is sent to hellfire for, that he does not provide or he does not take care of those whom he has been given responsibility for. The words of the Prophet ﷺ, not mine. The words of the Prophet ﷺ, not the ulama. The third responsibility that needs to be taken into consideration, education of the wife and education of the children. Whose responsibility is it? The man. It's the man's responsibility. I am going to be questioned about the state of my children and their Islam, their deen. I am held responsible for the state of my wife, her education, her deen. And so prior to getting married, I need to make sure I select a woman who is going to be a good teacher for my children. In her akhlaq, in her understanding of the deen. And of course, sisters, by default, if they want to be good wives, should educate themselves prior to marriage. After marriage, the man becomes responsible for her education, just as her father was once responsible for her education. It's the man's responsibility. If she refuses, that's something else. But the man has to provide her with the opportunity to continue to learn. Does it mean financially? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. But the uprightness of his wife is his concern, the man. And if the wife is ignorant, the children will be ignorant. Why? Because she is the first school. She is the first school. Children speak with the mother tongue. And the mother tongue is not only the tongue of talk, it's the tongue of action. The way you speak with your body, you take from your mother. And your father, of course, but your mother first. And so, spouse selection is very important. If you put beauty over character and deen, then you will fall into problems. Can a woman be beautiful and have good character and good deen? Of course she can. It's not to say you can only have one over the other, no. But the main concern should be deen, character, understanding of life. If you marry a woman whose only concern is this life and dunya and looking pretty, don't complain in a few years' time when you have problems in your life. Don't complain. That's what you have sown with your hand. And now you have to bear the fruit of that decision. The same can be said for the sisters. Like I said, next week. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us responsibility. These three things, they make up the foundation of that responsibility. Provision, intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't just mean intimacy of the kind that takes place in the evenings. I mean intimacy even in relationship. Care, compassion, concern, softness. As the Prophet ﷺ was with his spouses, with Aisha radiallahu anha, with Khadija radiallahu anha, with the others. Education, decision making, taking the reins of what is happening and not allowing for others to take the reins. This is a necessity and it's a part of our deen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows His creation better than the creation know themselves. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the qawwama to the men, He gives the qawwama to the men for a reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, بِمَا فَضَّلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ وَبِمَا أَنفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. That which they have been given of khasa'is, of qualities. That which they have been given of qualities that relate to leadership. Men have been given these qualities over women. And the one who doesn't believe this can take their issue up with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Allah tells us. Men have been given the qualities of leadership over women in the household. Therefore, men have to take responsibility. And as the saying goes, not every male is a man. It takes a male to make a child, but it takes a man to raise one. And we are not an ummah of males. We are an ummah of men. We are an ummah of men. And so we have to take this position seriously. And the starting place is the home. It's the home. One of the contemporary thinkers of Islam, he said, we have three places that are of extreme importance to us strategically as a community. The home, the masjid, and the school. The schools, we don't have much control over. The masajid and the homes, by Allah's grace, we still have a lot to say with what takes place in them. And so if I am complaining about the schools, I am complaining about the media, I am complaining about the society, but yet I'm neglecting my home, who's to blame firstly and foremostly? It's myself. And from the qualities of a man is that he takes himself into account. He takes himself into account and he owns up for his mistakes and he fixes them. He doesn't sit around and complain. He doesn't wait for someone else to come along and fix his problems. No, that's not a man. A man fixes his problems. A man seeks aid, but he takes responsibility. I made a mistake. I need to work on that mistake. That's from the quality of a man. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us men and guide us. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده صلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, ساقي القوم آخرهم. The one who provides drink for a people is the last of them to drink himself. The one who provides is the last to eat. That's a leader. And there is a weak hadith attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. The ulama, some suggest that it's not from his kalam and it's simply a mathal, an example that's given. Sayyidul qawm khadimuhum. That the leader of a people is their servant. The one who serves is the leader. And this hadith gives a similar meaning. Saqil qawm akhiruhum. The one who provides is the last to eat or to drink. That's the mindset that we should have in our homes as men. Before my needs comes the needs of my family. Before my pleasures comes the responsibility I have for my family. What does that mean in the long run? It means if I marry someone and I have children with that person, and after a few years there are difficulties, and I'm not happy anymore, I need to be a man, stand up, and continue in the marriage and take responsibility for the relationship that I started for the sake of raising a righteous generation. I should not simply say, I'm done, I'm not happy, let me look for happiness. No. Happiness does not come in this life. And you will never find it. The one who searches for happiness in this life is like the one who drinks seawater trying to quench his thirst. He will die from the salt prior to quenching the thirst that he's suffering from. Likewise, run after happiness in this life, in a few years' time, you'll wake up depressed because you cannot be happy in this life. This life was not designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for happiness. It was designed to be a test. Marriage is a test. If you get married thinking it's going to make you happy, I'm very sorry to inform you that you will have many unhappy days as well. Why? Because marriage is a test. Children are a test. You will love them, but you will also be annoyed by them. You will love having them around, but you'll want times where they're not around so you can have time to yourself. It's a test. Ups and downs, good moments, bad moments, smiles and tears, pain and pleasure. That's life. Marriage is a part of life. And so, if you're looking for happiness in marriage, you're not going to find it. You'll find moments of happiness, but you will find moments of difficulty. You will have times of happiness and times of sadness. Just as I cannot wake up happy every single day, I cannot wake up sad every single day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, after difficulty comes ease. Which means, before ease comes what? Difficulty. It's the nature of life. And marriage is there to fulfill a function, to protect us from our own selves, yes, but it's not a vehicle for pleasure. It's a vehicle to raise a righteous family, acquire paradise together, work for the greater good of the ummah, not for our individual needs and wants and pleasures. And that's what it's become. Today a marriage is two individuals. One sees the other as a means of fulfilling their desire. The other sees the other as a means of fulfilling their desire. They're both searching for their pleasures and desires. They run away from each other. Why? Because they're thinking about themselves. But marriage should be two individuals who look at each other and want to fulfill the needs and pleasures of each other. What happens? They run towards each other because they're both thinking about the other. If you think about yourself in marriage, you will be unhappy, your wife will be unhappy. If you think about your wife in marriage and she thinks about you, you will be happy and she will be happy and your children will be happy too. And everything that has been set out in the framework of Islam is to provide an environment which is conducive for that. Providing intimacy, responsibility, being just, education, they are all components of what contribute to a happy marriage. And a happy marriage contributes towards upright, stable, intelligent, righteous children. And that generation, they lead to an upright nation. And that's what we're missing today. And so when we go back to our homes, we need to realize the impact that we are having in what is going to come tomorrow. Ask the person who comes from a divorced household, a broken home, about the suffering they still have to go through, even in adulthood, and they will tell you. And so we need to look and reflect and rectify so that we can move forward. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to do so. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma tub alayna wa'afu anna إنك أنت ربنا اللهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا أكرم الأكرمين اللهم ارحمنا اللهم أكرمنا اللهم وفقنا في بيوتنا يا رب العالمين وفي المجتمع الإسلامي جميعا وأقم الصلاة.
A few minutes, brother.